Right.
Okay, so we can start.
Yes, please.
Okay, so thank you all for attending this session. Eh, mm, the co-chairs of this RDA working group are my colleagues Venkat, Anu, Kristan, who couldn't attend this session, but he will join in the next session next week, and I. So thank you all for joining today. And I think that we can start with a introduction of this working group and why we are here today. Here we are the useful links. The first link is for our web of the working group. And the important link here is the second link for adding notes of our session. So please go to the second link. We can copy the link in the, yes, Anu copied the link in the chat. And in this link, we have the list of attendees of this meeting. So please join us in this list.
Also, sorry, Celia, if I could just interrupt. Also, on top of the meeting shared collaborative notes is a link to the Mentimeter and the code. So if you want to follow along with the presentation on Mentimeter, you could do that as well. Thanks. Sorry,
Okay.
Celia.
No,
Please go ahead.
thank you. Thank you. Well, the another important issue is that the starting point of this working group is the project, the Fair for Health project. Is a project who has received funding of the European Commission, and the main objective of Fair for Health is to facilitate and to encourage the scientific community to verify, to apply the FAIR principles in the health research domain. And concretely, this at the end of this month, FAIR for Health will finish. This working group will continue with our purpose to facilitate a fair strategy to the health research performing organizations. This is the agenda for today. And in the chat, we can see the code for Mentimeter. That is the tool that we are using for this presentation. And we would like to do an interactive presentation. So please introduce the code in Menti. Please participate, because for us is important your contributions and your feedback. So firstly, we can introduce this working group, and then we will review the main outputs that we have so far. That is the global landscape analysis. And then we are working on an impact assessment, and an important survey for us to gather information. And finally, we will perform, well, we will transmit a presentation of an important guest speaker regarding the FAIR Cookbook. So please, we can continue with the introduction. The main objective is to analyze, to demonstrate what are the tasks of this working group which are in progress, and we have a final or last versions of the landscape analysis that I commented. Then we can discuss about the impact assessment of the fair policy adoption, and we will launch the community survey, and we will share the presentation from Philippe Rocaserra. So, as I said, the starting point was that some colleagues of the Fair for Health Consortium meet to analyze why it's important to transmit these fair policies to the health research performing organizations. So the working group on raising fairness in health data and health research performing organizations perform 3 BOPs in previous RDA plenaries from April 2019. After, in this, the main objectives in these BOPs was to analyze and to address the needs to create a useful and clear guidelines for these health research performing organizations to follow, or to be able to follow the FAIR principles with clear guidelines. So then we perform a case statement, and finally this working group was officially endorsed in August 2020. And then in the plenary 16, November 2020, we performed the official launch of this RDA working group. Our last plenary was in April 2021. We wanted to complete our landscape analysis to complete the global analysis that the chairs and members of this working group had carry out. In addition, the chairs of this working group, Venkat, Anu, Kristan, and I met monthly to follow up and to review the ongoing tasks. So I think that this is a good background. If my colleagues want to add something at this point.
Yeah, well, okay, just to think about slightly the future as well. So yes, thanks, Celia, for that great introduction. And we have roughly until spring next year officially to complete the work, but we are looking to perhaps extend it slightly. Things have been a little difficult during the COVID period, as I'm sure it has been for many of you out there. So we've not been able to do everything we might have been able to do. And of course, we've not been able to have any face-to-face meetings as well. Anyway, some excuses there, but we hope to have a slight extension, which may be to the next RDA plenary, but that's to be confirmed. But for now, we are looking at least until spring next year. Any other comments?
I don't think I have any comments, at least right now. So Venkat, if you just want to.
Or indeed, any questions from any of the attendees, then please do ask. Well, we'll carry on into the next point in the agenda. No? Okay. So I won't, I'll just briefly go over what Celia has already mentioned about landscape analysis and also the impact assessment. And I won't spend too long on this, especially on the landscape analysis, because we've discussed this enough and it's been presented before at the last plenary, although it wasn't actually finalized at that point. It was on the verge of being completed. But I think it's slightly misleading to say that it's been completed as well, in the sense that it should be treated as a living document. And let's say it's at least the version 1 of it has come and gone. And there are certainly new things I can think of the top of my head, like certain, well, there are the draft UNESCO recommendations on open science, for example, which is mentioned in the existing version of the landscape analysis, but I think this is actually going to be formally endorsed in the next month or even this month, and these things need to be factored in as well. You can access the landscape document. It's a Google Doc, and I think the link for it is in the shared document. So if you wish to have a look, and you're more than welcome to comment again still. As I say, it is more of a living document than anything, and we can certainly add things. So it is a collection of global and legal ethical considerations of the health research data, and it aimed to gather national and international guidelines and policies to be taken into account for the fair policy adoption, or the guidelines that we're trying to implement, of course, and profiling the levels of fair strategy adoption across the world. And of course, when we think about this last point, of course, there's a huge disparity depending on the region we're talking about. And of course, areas like Europe and North America and Australia seem to be well ahead of many other places, but this isn't to say that other regions of the world in Latin America and Africa, for example, and some parts of Asia aren't embracing the FAIR principles. It's just that they may be at a lower level or in isolated pockets, let's say. And when we were doing this landscape analysis, it was quite difficult to get full engagement from the community to contribute. And so it was largely written by us, the co-chairs, with some additions from various members of this working group and others as well. But it has been mostly done by us, and we freely admit that there are large gaps in the document, and we would welcome any of those to be filled in. I'm sure if you've attended one of these meetings already, that you've heard us ask this before, but if you're new to this group, then please do have a look. And if there's anything that you know of in certain areas of the world which we have missed, then that'd be great, because this will certainly add to what we can do with the draft guidelines that we are ultimately what the output of the this working group would be. So yes, we've tried to cover all regions of the world, all continents, and it's been just an exercise of doing a large literature review, as you can well imagine, when doing such an analysis. And yeah, we would like your opinion if you've not already given us one already. So I'll just pause there in case there's any questions. or any comments from one of the other co-chairs, of course.
Yeah, I just want to pitch and reiterate what Venkat mentioned, that we do not have very good coverage of certain areas just because of our lack of knowledge of policies in those areas. So if any of you have knowledge or know folks that can contribute, it would be great if you could point them to contribute to the document also, or if you could connect us to them, that would be great as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, yes, if you can at least put us in touch with any potential good sources, yes, we could at least inquire with them, and then they wouldn't need to do any writing, or you wouldn't need to do any writing. We can take it from there, but we just want good sources of information where we can be confident in what we're writing. But we have got a lot in there, but we freely admit, as I say, that there will be gaps. I know that for certain. Okay. No comments in the chat or in the shared documents. Okay. So moving on. Also in the shared document, and the link is here in this Menti slide, is a recent impact assessment which we started on. And this is quite a lightweight document so far. And it's really, well, it's not intended to be anything more than a lightweight document. It's on the back of the landscape analysis, the findings there, and to just try and provide a breakdown with societal, economic, and scientific considerations for fair adoption. So it's very much in a draft state at the moment. We would like you to review it if possible, and this is the first time we're actually opening it up for public review. And it is far from complete. I freely admit that as well, and we need to color this in a bit more. I think in terms of doing impact assessments of this particular kind, I know that I'm not an expert on this, and I'm not sure if I'm speaking for the other co-chairs here, but I don't think they are exactly either. If this is something that you have expertise in, then we would really appreciate some input here. But we have given it these headings so far, and maybe there are other headings that we should be considering as well on top of this. But certainly in terms of how we should be thinking about KPIs, for example, of how we could measure the draft guidelines that we wish to implement or produce from this working group, how could they be measured, for example, from how things are currently to how things could be in the future. And for each of these headings is societal, economic, and scientific. So the document is there. It should be freely editable. Well, if you can comment, that would be preferable, or at least use suggesting mode if you were to edit it. But it's there to be viewed and shared as well. If you could perhaps share it with anyone else that you might know that might be interested in this or has expertise in such a document, then that would be really appreciated. I'm going to stop again. One of the co-chairs, if there's any comments from you or anyone else in the audience.
Maybe we can introduce that the document on the impact assessment is in a version more draft than the landscape analysis. we can request that the contributions or feedback of the audience is welcome here, because we propose some methods and indicators to analyze this impact.
Absolutely, yeah. This, because this is a relatively recent document, and when I say recent, I mean the last couple of months. Then it is very much in a draft state and requires, some serious input, I think, if possible. So please don't be afraid to make comments or, butcher the document and delete or add things. Please suggest, of course, and we can take it from there. We can try and resolve the comments that are made. I'm not sure if Celia actually mentioned before, but one of the things that we do have every month now is a monthly members meeting where all of you in the audience, I don't know if everyone is a member of our working group in this audience, but if you're not, please do join. You can be kept up to date with developments through the RDA mailing list. But we have monthly meetings where we can actually discuss things like this impact assessment and other documents. And of course, if you've made any comments, then we can actually discuss those at those meetings. No comments? I think that's all from me for the landscape analysis and the impact assessment, but I look forward to some comments, and we can discuss further at the end of this presentation as well. We have time for general discussion too. Okay, thank you very much.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about a community survey that the working group has put together, which essentially tries to gather information on policies at both institutional and national levels, and potential requirements for data sharing that has been requested by either institutions, publishers, or national policymakers. And while we have tried to ask questions of general data sharing, we have also actually emphasized the concept of fair data and fair data sharing in this survey. And this survey was just launched possibly like yesterday, so it's not really a lot has, I mean, we haven't gotten any results or anything to talk about. We were in fact hoping to have had at least some initial results by this time, but unfortunately we were a little delayed in the launch. However, the survey has now been launched. So if you could go to the survey, I've just put a link to the survey, and as well as it's in the Mentimeter slides. And if you could go in, we would like to have members who have of our working group members who are attending this session, and anybody else that you think would be useful contributors of information, take this survey and provide us information. This survey is more or less, I mean, can be completed in an anonymous fashion. You do not have to share any of your specific details if you don't want to. Obviously, if you can, we would love to get, further details about who our respondents are. However, our main intent here is to just gather the information that will inform both what we hope to have in terms of, trying to complete our landscape document and also trying to complete our impact assessment document, and then also further the activities of this working group. So please go in and click on the survey and provide us some feedback. Thank you. So Venkat, if you want to go to the next slide. So we actually have a very interesting presentation lined up today, which is quite relevant to the work that's being done within this working group. And this is a presentation called the FAIR Cookbook, which is a recording. And this presentation is given by Dr. Roccacera. And I would actually call upon Susanna to introduce Philippe, if you could. I think you would do a much better job at it than I can.
Anu, thank you very much. Yes, so Philippe Roccacera is an associate member of faculty at the Department of Engineering Science at University of Oxford. And he also leads a group, coordinates a group with me on data readiness. And in the context of this work, which is part of the FAIR Plus project, he leads on the FAIR Cookbook activity. And I will be here to answer any question. Unfortunately, Philippe could not attend, but he thanks for the opportunity to be invited.
Of course. So Venkat, if you could go ahead and play the recording. Thank you.
Good morning. I will be presenting today the FAIR Cookbook, an effort by the FAIR Plus project. I'm Philippe Roccacera. I'm based at the University of Oxford in the data readiness group. So with no further ado, I will basically take you to a very quick tour of this live resource that has been developed by an excellent team. And really what the purpose of the book is to provide a collection of content, recipes that detail how to deliver FAIR. And basically what we are seeking is to provide a really practical hands-on content that really helps people implementing FAIR. And basically this is the main innovation and leading action of the book. We aim to engage anyone who needs really assistance with the developing FAIR practices and implementing them. And really, the book itself is developed by practitioners, people who have been wrestling with the FAIR principle for a long time, and we're trying to implement them and understand the difficulties of doing so. And it brings together a mixture of people, both from academia and industry. Some of them are also members of the Elixir consortium. So the motivations was that essentially we could find a large body of documentation about generic guidance around FAIR, but it was somehow difficult to find really practical guidance, which took people really from very nitty-gritty into the nitty-gritty details of the verification process. So in short, we want to deliver something akin to FAIR for doers, people who really at a cold face of these processes and need support in techniques, in solutions that we have experimented and played with. So the essential learning objectives are really working off example data sets to show how to improve the level of fairness, which leads in terms of which leads immediately into understanding the kind of assessment that one needs to perform to understand the level of fairness and their indicators. We also need to be able to identify source technologies and tools, mostly open source, and as well as figure out the kind of skills that are required for delivering fair in the real life, essentially. The purpose is also to identify key challenges, because not is all rosy in the fair world. There are significant hurdles, and we need to be honest about that and talk about this. So in terms of audience, I think it was really also quite challenging for the FairPlus project to delineate who we were targeting. And basically at the moment, we have a mix of people that are from policymakers, trainers, and funders who have huge needs, huge requests, because they mandate fair. But again, they need to provide the means to help people to do so. And we have the researcher and scientists that are producing data, and they want to make the maximum impact. And therefore, the notion of reuse, interoperability are critical to them. But this cannot be delivered without engaging with software developers and also the ontology developers, terminology managers, who are at the core of the verification processes. And of course, the key players here are the data stewards, data curators, and data manager, who are actually the linking component between all the three elements, entities that I've been telling you about up until now. So let's dive in. This is the landing page of the book. You can see it's based on the Jupyter book, which is also used by the Alan Turing Institute. We had a great collaboration with the group, and we're really thankful for the help they provided. So the layout is similar to what you can find. You've got basically the landing page, which organizes the content, one access to the content based on the key the fundamental aspects, dimensions of the FAIR principles, as you can see. But we also have sections which identify the kind of infrastructure, the tools, provide applied examples, and also assessments. So that's really the kind of environment that you will be faced when you access the element. And of course, you can get back to our repository, GitHub repositories, to open issues, and we'll get back to this in a moment. The recipes distribution at the moment, as you can see, we have a big content on interoperability and findability. We have also content on reusability. The hard bits are, in fact, the demonstration of some of the reusability aspects and accessibility. But this is, in a way, also reflecting on the kind of task that we have been doing so far. Because the book is in development. So let's look at the organization of a recipe and the anatomy, typical anatomy. And one of the element that we looked at this example is how to build an application ontology using a tool called Robot. And on the left-hand side, you have the general table of content of the recipe. The central pane is the main body of the recipe. On the right-hand side, you've got the kind of local table of content local to that recipe. You can see you've got a stable identifier designated for each of the recipes. This is the key outline of the content, and this is the kind of value. We want to have all the list of ingredients, to use the metaphor that we around the cookbook. We list the tools and the kind of entities that we will be using. Then we have a step-by-step guidance, which contains references to the right material, and whenever possible, we embed code, executable code. This is a Jupyter book, which can therefore connect to Jupyter notebooks, which can be executed either on Binder or on Colab at Google, for instance. We have this kind of summary card that gives you, key metadata about a recipe. It has a stable identifier, where we use W3ID, and each of the recipe has usually a graphical overview produced with the mermaid in the form of a flowchart that allows you to have a quick glance at the recipe and decide whether this is content relevant to you, whether you want to go deeper and read for that. So that's also a nice way to engage with the community and communicate, as well as develop the tool itself, the content of the recipe, to ascertain that all the contributors and editors understand what are the purpose of the recipe. Interestingly, we strive to make each recipe fair itself. So in terms of, you've got this kind of synopsis of the key elements. The license is always available. It's CC BY for all, Creative Commons for the reusability aspect. The findability is delivered by a markup with schema.org and bioschema, but also we have a sitemap which is provided. This markup is available through JSON LD markup. I also already mentioned the use of W3ID for providing a stable identifier to each recipe, as well as identifying authors using their ORCIDs. In terms of annotation, we use a credit attribution ontology to really track the contribution of each author. And this is really what mattered to us a lot, to make sure that people were acknowledged by their contribution at the right level. So if people want to contribute, again, because everything is based on GitHub, we have activated a GitHub discussion. So we've got a forum where people can engage and discuss a topic, but also everything is tracked. Open an issue, request an inclusion, and therefore you can really deliver this kind of request and augment the content of the book. So it's really a message for, if you want to contribute, you can engage with the community. These are the basically concepts that we are looking for to augment, and we are all constantly looking for new experts. And the kind of interaction that we provide is either from Google Doc to down to GitHub if you are more Git savvy, for instance. These are the partners that we've been operating with. You see a mix of industry, but also Elixir elements. We are now supported by Elixir Luxembourg, Elixir UK, which is great. In terms of organization, we organize monthly book dash. Again, a practice that we've lifted from the Alan Turing Institute, which worked really great. Basically, this is when we assemble our developers and contributors and include the new recipes in the book. We've got section editors, as you can see, as well as also specialists in UI and design, and to make the entire tool more appealing. So when it comes to the value, really, the resource is extremely important for training. I think this is the main feedback that we've got so far. It's been extremely positively received by a number of industry partners who have really used the material that we proposed and worked with us to help them in their daily practice. So we can see the synergies and the contribution so far. So it's a very nice way to interact with people. In terms of roadmap, we can this classic development steps from conceptualization to product, but we also evaluate these aspects in terms of ethical values, the kind of recipes that we want, the type of platform, as well as the sustainability plan. So this is, as I indicated at the beginning of the presentation, a live, ever-growing resource. We are constantly looking for content and to augment, for instance, on a specific data type that has not been covered in the book. But we are also interacting with other communities and other ecosystems, such as the RDM Toolkit, the Fair Sharing, Fair Assist, and we are working with the Pistoia Alliance, more specifically on clinical data aspects of that where verification process could be relevant, and with their specific components and difficulties. But also we want to improve the searchability. How do we produce our content in a more in a clear way? And this is what we will be doing with the term first skill annotation, for instance. The longer term aim is to embed that into the Elixir Knowledge Hub. So really, you can engage with us. We really would love to have you on board as well. And if you have content you'd like to integrate in the book, just join us, and we'll be happy to welcome you and work with you for augmenting the book itself. The book itself is now an IMI2 guidelines, officially recommended document. So that's a very successful outcome for the project. And hopefully many more recipes will be added from the different projects. If you want a full more detail about the project, you can look at this webinar that has been recorded back in May, where we dive a bit deeper into the detail of the book itself. I would like to obviously thank all the contributors, and especially these people, Tony, Wei, Susanna, Andrea, and Robert, who have been really essential in developing the book. And I'll take a stop here and take any questions. Thank you very much.
really. Thanks, Susanna, and please pass on our thanks to Philippe for the presentation. I wonder if there are any questions for Susanna from the audience.
I see a comment on the chat from Celia Alvarez. Thank you for saying that was a nice presentation. Thank you. What context have you used it? Oh, sorry, you are asking other people. You are not asking us, because obviously with the FBuild, we have these pharma people which are part of the project, the pharma partner, which are already using it. But obviously you are asking if anybody else has. Given that's relatively young resource, I would say it's a live resource, I don't think many people outside are properly aware. But in case anybody's on the call who has had experience, please let us know.
So Susanna, as folks are thinking about what they would like to ask about this resource, I just had a quick question. And at the end, Philippe talked about, inviting the community members maybe to join
Yes.
the group. And I was wondering, so if somebody has a specific use case and they want to come to you, so how does it work out? I mean, in the sense of how much help are you able to provide these folks for, developing a cookbook?
Absolutely. So it's obviously, there is a slide that explains the process, and I've added the link to the page that in the Cookbook explain the process, how to get involved. So at the moment, as we're operating within a project whose fund finish next year, but as Philippe already explained, we're already embedding the Cookbook into the Elixir ecosystem, which is broader than the project, and hopefully it's even broader than Elixir. Anybody who has expertise and wants to write a recipe, there are different ways to which contact what we call the editorial board, which is somehow filter the content and say, okay, this is relevant, this could fit in this area, go and write the recipe. And then there is somebody who reviews the recipe, there is an editorial group that reviews the recipe, and it gets published. So to make sure that there is complementarity, there is coverage, and somehow the recipe, it's deep enough, but there are recipes which are not necessarily deep. So there is so much to be covered. This is not the work that one group can do, neither just Elixir can do. That's why it's an open resource and has this lightweight governance to make sure that people can contribute. And because each recipe is citable and it's credited through the ORCID, that's the best we can do for people who want to, provide content and be able to cite it and be credited for that.
I see.
And Susanna, FAIR Plus is coming to an end soon, isn't it? Yes. And so in terms of sustainability, Elixir are going to take it forward and maintain it.
So Elixir doesn't maintain anything. So all the things you see in Elixir ecosystem are maintained by the respective node, which are national node. So, for example, EBI repository maintained by EBI. Elixir coordinate. So the Cookbook currently has two nodes who maintain them, the UK node and the Luxembourg node. And we are working, and because the contribution is across many nodes, we will have as many more nodes to help. This means we are distributing the maintenance of the resource. And also the resource is very light maintenance. It's Github based. There's nothing complicated to do there. I guess when talk about maintenance, we talk about content grow. And which is true for any resource you have. And because it's a collaborative resource already been placed in the ecosystem of Elixir resource, and we are connecting them, we expect this to be maintained by the community. And again, it's not limited to Elixir. People could clone the entire system and have it in-house. Some farmers are thinking to have the public recipe with their own closed recipe, for example, in-house, Some other institution could imagine, I don't know, to clone the entire system and do it in another field. or I don't know, NIH could have their own version, and we could connect and exchange directly. There are many options out there. At the moment, we are just working with whoever it's interested, and the Elixir community is. But we are open to anybody else, just to make clear.
Thank you for
And
that.
And in the context of what this working group is about with health data and sensitive data, I should know the answer to this, but I have forgotten, sorry. And there are lots of examples in the cookbook that can be used to treat such data as well, especially the metadata.
There are some, and we can always add more. And as you can see in the cookbook, there is a section called examples, where we have applied examples. So some of the recipes are generic, but not generic. They are still specific to a life science data, but generic in the sense that you can apply to different data sets type. And some take a specific data sets and then operate the verification on it to show what you need to do. Some of them have sensitive data, but not all of them, obviously.
Okay.
So just out of curiosity, have you been looking at like large scale repository that wants to verify their data sets?
Not yet. For the moment, what we had to do as part of the project, when we chose the example, we had to choose examples that were of interest to the pharma, and they were created by other projects within this IMI program, which is jointly European Commission and pharmaceutical company. Hopefully, I think Philippe did not have any slide, but we chose clinical data, both observational data and clinical trial data, as well as molecular data. We use these 3 types of data sets in order to try to cover as many use cases as possible.
Wondering if anybody else has questions for Susanna about the cookbook.
Would be interesting also to hear if other people have done created resources like this, or they are interested in creating resources like this. Like Philippe said at the beginning, our real motivation was there's a lot of guidance out there, but it's very generic. So if you have a specific clinical data set and you need to start selecting the different standard, the different storage options, the different, anonymization option and everything else, there isn't anything that goes in that type of specific level that we want to. And I wonder if other people have a plan to create similar recipe in the health space, because that would be useful to reach out and collaborate potentially.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I just don't know. Folks, please feel free to unmute yourself if you have a comment or if you have questions. Also, you can drop your comments or questions into the chat.
I was just going to share my screen again, just to go back to the Menti slide.
And also, again, if you want to watch this recording again, it's available as a link through the agenda. So please feel free, if by chance you don't have access to the recording, let us know, and then I will make sure that everybody does get access to this.
So I should just say what you're seeing on your screen now is back on our Mentimeter presentation slides. And you can now interact with the presentation. If you don't want to write questions in the chat window or in the shared doc, you can actually write any comments or questions into the Mentimeter, and they will appear on the screen in bubbles. So yeah, if you don't want to unmute, but I just noticed someone has unmuted just as I say that, Brian, if you'd like to speak, then please do. Brian?
Yes. Sorry, I was distracted by something else on the side. I have been involved in related projects with common metadata mapping and crosswalks. So I'm thinking that isn't this specific workgroup activity, but was just kind of paying attention after following some activities on the Fair for Health and metadata crosswalk activities and other efforts. So I'm not sure if this specific work group is the right place for that.
I'm trying to understand what, sorry, this is my lack of technical knowledge. When you're saying metadata crosswalks, do you mean in terms of interoperability, that kind of thing?
Yeah, in terms of interoperability, I found a effort that included the RDA indicators and DataCite and an EOSC and maybe 16 other metadata schemes, and made a crosswalk mapping all the metadata elements across these 16 different metadata schemes. And that seemed like it was related to the RDA work group and some of these other activities, but there's so many interrelating groups. I don't think it's this specific work group or interest group. And I've been involved in multiple overlapping efforts with Mobilizing Computable Biomedical Knowledge Consortium and COVID Knowledge Accelerator and EBM on Fire, where we've been working with the Fair for Fire health group. And some of these efforts are what we're calling a common metadata framework that can express metadata that is used for findability, accessibility, interoperability, reusability, and trustability, and how that would map to many of the other standards and schemes for metadata. So that that's what piqued my interest with the RDA efforts. And I'm very new to the RDA and just signed up for the plenary, and I'm going to some of the work group meetings to learn more about it. So I don't quite understand yet how the many overlapping work groups and interest groups and related groups that are not actually RDA groups, but working through all of this, all fit with each other. So it's my focus isn't exactly on the guidelines, how to implement FAIR or the policy. I'm focusing a bit more on the infrastructure metadata schema mapping layer. I figured that may have some overlap with this particular work group and presentations and the discussions.
We superficially look at the technical side. This is definitely not what I would call one of the more technical interest groups or working groups. There are several out there. I'm sure you're going to attend a few of those, which are really getting into the nuts and bolts of schemas and what have you. We're looking more at a policy level, but of course we do need to have a bit of knowledge, but I wouldn't count myself as a programmer or anything like that. So it's more a superficial level that we might be addressing those issues here.
So Susanna, you had a question for Brian, or maybe some clarification and pointers?
No, I was trying to understand which crosswalk Brian was referring to, because there've been many. You were absolutely right. Yeah. And I think we will all share the difficulties of having to follow the many activity with the RDA, because there is a lot of complementarity in the group. It's tricky. So you need to learn the landscape and then send the relevant one.
Right, I agree. So that is the crosswalk that I was referring to, and I found other ones from earlier times.
Yeah.
And then I just put a link in the chat where we took that crosswalk and started to map our common metadata framework to it. And all we've done so far is the identifiers section.
Oh. I see you are part of the COCA group. This is what Philippe is part of.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not involved. I've heard from him. Yes, now I'm connecting the dots. Sorry.
Right. There's a group called COVID Knowledge Accelerator, or COCA, which is COVID is a focus to get people interested in that area. But the core work we do with the COVID Knowledge Accelerator is just about facilitating standards and terminologies and tooling to make science machine interpretable. So we have 11 active working groups within the COVID Knowledge Accelerator. One is the Terminology and Ontology Working Group, and we're working with Philippe to develop tooling to support terminologies, and we're building a scientific evidence code system that has terminologies for study design, risk of bias, and statistics terms. And Philippe is also the lead of statistics ontology, so we're coordinating with him on that. What you see in this spreadsheet you're showing here is, you could see this as a set of terminologies, if you will, for each of these data elements in the way of understanding the metadata crosswalk. So that's an overlap between metadata technical sharing across schemas and terminology development. There's another working group called the Common Metadata Framework Working Group that we've been doing a lot of mapping and just recently discovered this crosswalk. And I think the discovery was an email about this work group meeting was shared on the Fair for Health listserv, or Fair for Fire listserv. And in learning about it, I learned about these other activities, and looks like it's very helpful to consider on a much broader scale. The Mobilizing Computable Biomedical Knowledge Consortium is wanting to support many standards and interactivity across the standards to help mobilize computable biomedical knowledge. And it looks like this crosswalk touches on a lot of areas that would facilitate with that. So it does get complex with so many overlapping groups addressing overlapping issues. But I guess I'm thankful to learn about these activities through the note that went out about a week ago pointing this out. And I'm just, kind of rapidly getting introduced to figure out where to best fit in with some of these overlapping efforts. So you can see here on the screen, the identifier is rows 4 to 17, and they've mapped RDA metadata mentions unique identifier and location URL. If you scroll to the right, different metadata schemes do that. And if you get the column T, we did a line-by-line mapping so that the identifier has a value, which is the identifier, and then you could have type of identifier, which maps to an identifier type in one of these schemes. A couple were not covered. We didn't address the version of the identifier, for example. And then the URL is an identifier, but we treat it as a location. But this is, there's 770 rows in this spreadsheet. And we just got through the identifier portion so far, but that may be able to help, with a common metadata framework that can work across, any of these metadata schemes. So some of this is is mapping to one metadata scheme only. You know, hundreds of rows are not even mapping between two different schemes, but identifiers naturally touched, I think, every metadata scheme. So don't want to go too far off your agenda if that's a problem, because this is obviously not about cookbooks or guidance or policies. This is very much at the deep technical layer for facilitating, you know, making all these other policies and implementations possible across different systems using different schemas.
So
But
Brian, sorry, have you, I did not see a fire mapping there. Is once you're done mapping web from your framework, are you thinking about maybe doing the fire standards as well, or is that?
Well, we actually, in the history of our project, and I sent you an email that includes this information, but I can read from it briefly. Step number one in the history is the Mobilizing Computable Biomedical Knowledge Standards Working Group completed a year of effort and ultimately published an article just categorizing metadata in 13 categories for FAIR and trustability concepts. Then we started the COCA Common Metadata Framework Working Group just in February of this year, including some of the MCBK group and COCA participants. We spent 4 months mapping the FHIR resource structure definitions to these principles, trying to find, can we just do this in a FHIR resource? And we created a citation resource that is the closest to covering all of these concepts. And in the FAIR for FHIR implementation guide, we're going to include the citation resource as one way of describing these things. But after we mapped the concepts to 20 or so different FHIR resources to understand the metadata mapping there, around June, we changed our approach. And instead of being FHIR specific, we tried to come up with a general specification that might be able to be mapped to any system. And that is the example we have now in the specifying metadata spreadsheet, and started mapping from that in the example you just showed on the screen. So our modeling for our overall mapping is so based on the FHIR framework that it's almost the same. A few minor adjustments where FHIR doesn't cover a concept and we felt the need to cover it. But it'd be very easy to map back to FHIR structures because of that. And now we may be interested in mapping 2 schemas that are not FHIR structures, which can then ultimately help the crosswalk between a bunch of data that's not in FHIR and a bunch of data that's in FHIR, and to help in either direction. So that's a potential use case for it. And if it makes sense to coordinate any of that with an RDA work group, we'd be interested in figuring out how we do that, rather than just keeping it isolated in yet again one other consortia work group doing something.
Right. I actually, to be honest, I do not remember if there are RDA work groups currently that are currently doing anything. I know that there were a couple maybe that are in the maintenance phase right now. Susanna, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, it might be good to just go through the RDA.
Yeah, that sounds right, because even the crosswalk, it's not clear that it was although RDA interest group is included in it. It doesn't look like the crosswalk itself was an RDA product. And it might have been, you know, with the EOSC group or some other group that's related that created it. So I found it through, you know, the RDA searches and things like that. But ultimately, it's not clear it's actually being maintained by any RDA work group.
No, you're right. That's possible. I've also had the link to the metadata schema group because they are also doing some cross mapping. I think you might find that some of the cross mapping they might be more high level. You are very much into the health area, so it's very true that you are, you know, a connection between, you know, this group, which is more health related, although it's not doing the cross map walk with others that are doing the crosswalk.
Right.
It's always,
And the work
yeah.
group that you just shared, they have a crosswalks link and says, as dated on 15 May 2020, there are 12 crosswalks from 12 schemas.
Yeah.
So it looks like that is probably a precursor to the current one that has 17.
You're right, yeah.
So I think this may be the group where it started, but either the group did not continue and someone else did, or the group did not update their website.
Bear in mind, Brian, that the groups, I have experience because I'm also co-chairing a group. I've also been on tab, so I've seen the evolution of many groups. The group are based on people volunteer to do work. That's also why you can see from this group, there is a table that say, are you active or not? Because it's based on volunteer. If you think that this is work that maybe will fit under this group, you should talk to the chairs and perhaps try to volunteer to create a sub-activity. This is really based on people committing to do the work and talking to the chair and find an area where there is a broader interest, and then, you know, but then put the time to do things. This is at least my experience.
So there are 4 chairs listed with the research metadata schemas work group, and trying to reach one of them, or that group may be the best fit for this activity with RDA.
Possibly, but you have also an audience here which is interested in health. So at that stage, then you can later organize joint session and things like this. It's really very difficult to try to communicate, but joint sessions, it's a way of trying to bring 2 groups that are doing a related work.
Right. And yeah, so, and it does say there's a meeting schedule if they're still meeting a year later on the same schedule, the 4th Thursday each month on that one. And I'll see if they have an activity later in the conference schedule. Yeah, for that. Okay, well, as I said, we're obviously doing a lot of active development in the area and happy to coordinate. So if that helps a particular work group, we can coordinate. And given the COVID focus and evidence-based medicine on fire focus that's behind what we're doing, we obviously have a primary interest in health. And that's the first use case of, you know, science in fire form. Where we're giving the most attention.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing it up to the attention of the folks here, Brian. So I guess we have a little bit of time, maybe around 10-15 minutes, to generally talk about where we see this working group going and immediate next steps. Venkat, Venkat and Celia, do you want to take this up?
Excuse me. Well, I actually just wanted to ask a quick question of the attendees today. And okay, not everyone needs to answer, because I'm sure many of you do know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands what we are trying to do as a final output. And if not, then do you want to ask? Because that is important at the end of the day, especially considering we're in the final leg of what we're trying to do. As I mentioned earlier on, we do want to see if we can get a minor extension on the process, partly due to some hindrances in terms of getting the work done. But is everyone on board with what we are trying to do as the final output from this working group? Or maybe I should say it the other way around. Is anyone not understanding what we're trying to do?
So maybe it might be useful for folks that are new to this working group to just enumerate what's been written in our case statement and kind of give a flavor of what we anticipate to be the primary outputs of the working group. So I believe Celia did cover this briefly in her introduction to the working group. The working group ultimately aims to come out with draft guidelines with a couple of documents along the way, of which, the landscape analysis document was one. The impact assessment document is another. And then the survey to gather on a larger scale than what's done in the landscape analysis, information about the guidelines for fair data sharing. And once we have compiled all of this, the idea is to look for commonalities amongst all of the various policies and guidelines, and to come up with maybe some kind of a draft guideline that is pertinent to health research performing organizations. And I guess more aspirational goal at the end was to have a couple of folks be able to implement these draft guidelines and test the feasibility of such guidelines. So, and hence the reason for asking if there are any volunteers within this group who may be interested in maybe, generating these draft guidelines, but also to help in implementation of these in maybe even small pilots to test the feasibility.
Exactly, and that's why I was just making sure everyone was on the same page as us with understanding what we're trying to produce at the end of this, and ultimately to be potential guinea pigs for pilot schemes of what these draft guidelines might produce. And indeed, we're not going to be producing, well, it's very likely, let's say, that the guidelines won't be just be produced from scratch. There are some existing draft guidelines that were actually produced as a result of the Fair for Health project, which Celia mentioned earlier, and which is actually coming to a close at the end of this month. But those draft guidelines are just that, they are draft, and they're very simplistic perhaps, but they could be the starting point for what we try to produce. What we wanted to do through this working group is to validate some of what those draft guidelines were trying to say, but moreover, try to do a better job, let's say, because that wasn't done with the same amount of effort that we've been trying to put through this RDA working group. And indeed, those draft guidelines are very EU-centric, European-centric, because they come through the Fair for Health project. what we're trying to do in this working group is, of course, at a global level. So yeah, what we do want to do now is to try and gather names of potential pilot implementers, whatever you might want to label it as. Ideally, this might, well, I'm pulling this date out of thin air, but I would hope that early next year, meaning February-ish, we could actually start thinking about trying to, yes, do this implementation itself. And it would be in the run up to the end of the actual lifetime of the working group itself, which, as I said, will be somewhere in between spring and summer next year. So if you don't want to say right now, if you don't want to put your hand up now, or if you don't want to say exactly, then of course you can email us at a later date, or you can even just contribute on a shared document at a later date. I'm sure we'll be keeping a check on that as well.
Absolutely. I can imagine that it's probably a big ask
Yeah,
from us. So if you would like to mull it over and then get back to us, that's absolutely, perfectly fine with us. The other thing I also want to emphasize, if you could please ensure that you become members of the working group. So any communication that we do send out is always sent out to the mailing list. So if you're a member, you get information about the working group, its progress, meetings, etc. So that way it can be updated.
And as I mentioned also earlier, we do have monthly meetings where you can come and join us. You can just email us. Well, actually, if you become a member, as Anna just said, then you'll be able to find out through that as well. But if you want to hear more about what we're doing, then of course that's another way of doing so. Celia, did you have anything to add as well?
No, I think that this complete only to highlight that our purpose, or we expect to have output before next plenary. So the attendees that won't join us through this working group can join in the web of the working group to follow the monthly meetings and our progress.
So are there any questions or comments?
I think that if the participant want to recite the emails, it's necessary to be member of the working group through the web of the RDA, right?
Well, that's one primary way, but what we've also been doing is compiling the list of the attendees to all our sessions in the past plenary and the birds of feathers that we've had. And we have been sending out emails to them as well, just to keep them posted if they're interested. So sometimes we're probably, duplicating our emails to some of the members if they're both members and they're on the list. But yeah, we just wanted to make sure that whatever our emails reach folks that have an interest in this space.
Okay, well, I think this goes without saying thank you to everyone, and especially to Philippe as well and Susanna for their presentation there. We would just really appreciate your contributions in, as I say, this final stage in this working group. And to get the sort of practical side of what we're trying to accomplish done by testing what we're trying to produce as an output. And yeah, unfortunately, the next plenary is even further away than it would normally be. But if we can try and get that minor extension as mentioned before, then I'm sure we can definitely meet that target. And hopefully to see you all at that next meeting, which would definitely be the closing session for this working group, if that's how it works out.
Yeah, I want to add my thanks to everybody who attended the session today. A special thanks, of course, to Susanna and Philippe for a very fantastic presentation. And, you know, that's been, I think it's a very interesting project. Please do keep in touch with us. And if you can, you know, get involved, contribute to the working group, that's something that we would definitely welcome with open arms. You know, even I mean, even if your level of contribution is not very high in terms of being able to write, even if you're able to point us in a general direction and provide discussion, we find that's very useful to the members of the working group, and that would be a great, fantastic thing to happen.
Absolutely, I think that needs to be emphasized. That when we ask whether you can contribute, we're not going to jump on you and say that, you know, you're going to write a huge chunk of text or anything like that. Even the most minor amount of contribution would be most welcome, or just refer us to things that we don't know about, anything that you see missing in the current documents that we've shared with you, then that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing and doing all this work. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone for joining. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your RDA. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.